when the committee considered Annmarie Adams, they basically looked at a number of things. The first thing was that Annmarie Adams had been involved with the Osler Library of History of Medicine for a number of years. She'd been a curator of the Osler Library, but in particular associated with the Essay Awards, associated with the Molina Award presentations that we have, and the Molina Awards. She was involved in helping and monitoring many students, medical students at McGill University. So that was the first overall, her engagement with medical students as a clear aspect of her life. The second aspect of her life is really quite an interesting situation where she was dean of the Faculty of Architecture at McGill University. She was the chairperson of the Department of the Social History at McGill University, and she has become a full member of the Faculty of Medicine. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rolando, for the kind introduction and for the invitation. I'm so honored to deliver the McGovern lecture this year, and I have enjoyed every minute of being at the conference so far. So, our dissertations never leave us. I finished mine here in California in the early 1990s, 35 years ago, and it has haunted me that it was so dependent on prescriptive sources. The sources I used to explore women, houses, and doctors in England in the last 3 decades of the 19th century told us a lot about idealized womanhood, but not about how real women occupied space. So sometime about 2011, I decided to return to the same basic questions I tackled in my PhD, but to come at the materials from the opposite direction. I really wanted to study real women or a real woman and figure out how she occupied architecture and what it meant for medicine. So all that to say that I'm now writing, I've been working on it for many years, what I call a spatial biography of a famous doctor called Maude Abbott through 10 spaces. Maude Elizabeth Seymour Abbott was a Canadian physician, among Canada's earliest women medical graduates, and an internationally known expert on congenital heart disease. Her magnum opus is the Atlas of Congenital Cardiac Disease from 1936, a groundbreaking text in cardiac research. Abbott graduated in arts from McGill University in 1890 and was famously rejected from studying medicine at McGill because of her gender. She attended nearby Bishop's College, graduating in medicine in 1894. As curator of the McGill Medical Museum, she transformed the way medical museums around the world were organized as teaching tools, and Abbott's work opened doors for women in medicine and was foundational for modern heart surgery. Now, there are many books on Abbott already. She's an extraordinary person and well-known beyond Canada. There are many experts on Abbott here in the room today. But the books all basically say the same things, including lots of mistakes and a lot of sexism. So the image on the screen now is from one of the most revealing epiphany moments of my research, where in another doctor's archive, I saw a note that William Osler had kept a photo of Maude Abbott in his, oh, that's bad. Right at my epiphany moment, I drop it. So, where in another doctor's archive, I saw a note that William Osler had kept a photo of Maude Abbott in his own copy of his own textbook, and lo and behold, Mary Ural chased down this exact copy, and there it was, including an amazing imprint on the textbook page. I felt like it had just been there waiting for me to find.
Advice.
So the image, what I have come to call the palimpsest, was at the center of a recent exhibit I curated at the Osler Library and is the inspiration for today's lecture. What I promised in my application for funding so long ago for my book project was no small thing. It is to produce a new type of feminist biography that works especially well for women in STEM professions, of which there are very few biographies. So the gist is that rather focus on constraints and hardships, as most books do on professional women and certainly on women doctors, I focus on how Abbott occupied space, granting her a kind of architectural agency, which of course renders a much more positive narrative arc than the story of the people and places that kept her out. As I promised the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, I think my spatial biography methodology gets closer to women's real experience and may encourage more young women to enter these professions. So my 10 spaces, people always ask what my 10 spaces are in constant flux, and at the moment they look something like this. I'm going to show you 8 of them in quick succession. This is the first one, her world headquarters, the McGill Medical Museum. Some of the 10 spaces are architecture, others are more conceptual or generic. They are in 3 countries across a wide range of building types. Some are even from after her death because, of course, our biographical traces are not limited to our lifespans. And showing these images to you in quick succession, I hope will communicate in a sort of filmic way the overall argument of the book. I better hang on to this. That Abbott and probably many women like her occupied a wide range of spaces that shaped their lives. And this amazing photo is by James Lockhart, a medical student at McGill who documented his daily life in and around 1918. It's space number 1. Space number 2, called the Curator's Room, is one of the more conceptual spaces. There are 14 logbooks like this with the story of every specimen that she received. I get completely lost in these logbooks. Abbott devised a remarkable cataloging system which began with entry numbers in these books and was copied the world over. She was obsessed with the number 10, the decimal system, hence my choice of 10 spaces, and each of my chapters has exactly 10 images. So I am telling Abbott's life in 100 images, many of them architectural. I think she'd appreciate the methodology and its constraints and its capacity for change. I'm basically telling her life story through the frameworks of her own system. New York, there's the 60th birthday of a famous American male doctor, Emanuel Libman. Many of you will know about Dr. Libman. I used the event as a kind of archaeological site to study Abbott's network of friends. The paper is already published in a special issue of a journal on the history of the Nobel Prize, because many Nobel Prize winners gathered at this event, at which she gave a speech and sat at the head table. And here's another party. I bet you didn't know she was such a party girl. The medical gala at the BMA, the British Medical Association centenary in 1932. Abbott was hardly ever photographed, but here she is, okay, and she's sitting right in line with the print. So, of course, it's all about the power of the architectural axis. The Century of Progress Fair in Chicago, 1933-34, for which Abbott curated an exhibit but did not attend. This is one of many occasions where she self-diagnosed as being depressed. She used the term blue in her diaries. And of course, I was thinking of this during the wonderful paper on the Blue Boy. A favorite image with a visitor's memories of the plan scrawled below this famous house. This chapter is about medical tourism. The house, known as the Open Arms, is in Oxford. Everybody knows it. Abbott recovered here in 1911 for 3 weeks under the watchful eye of William and Grace Osler. The relationship of Abbott and Osler is what I will speak on today, drawn from this chapter. Back to the US, this is Building 54 at Walter Reed, the most bomb-proof building in America when President Eisenhower opened it in 1955. Here in this chapter, this is mostly about the invisibility, women's invisibility in the archives. And I tell the story of a lost scrapbook of Abbott's, still not back in the hands of its proper owner, McGill University. Abbott is the only Canadian and only woman physician to appear in Diego Rivera's mural on the history of cardiology. You see her here with a medical specimen and a child patient. I've recently identified the photo that Rivera used for this posthumous representation, this chapter 7, is about 7 portraits of Abbott, and the other 2 and why they all look alike. And the other 2 chapters, which I'm not showing you, are on what Abbott read. It's called The Reading Room. She was an avid reader, and a history museum that she helped to found. So that brings us to the end of the 10 spaces. On to the lecture per se. Abbott and Osler first met in 1898 or 1899. Abbott would have known of Osler before this meeting since she trained in Montreal, and the older physician, he was 20 years her senior, worked at McGill University and the Montreal General Hospital from 1870 to 84. The 2 physicians were correspondents, colleagues, and friends for about 20 years. From Osler's letters, we know that they met in person about a dozen more times. I analyzed some of these meetings in the book, in Baltimore, Montreal, London, and Oxford. And they corresponded regularly from 1904 to 1919. A distinctive aspect of their relationship was that after Osler's death in 1919, Abbott became an expert on his life and work. I purport in the book that the letters are evidence of a very different relationship than other authors have depicted. Douglas Waugh, for example, eroticizes the relationship between Abbott and Osler, suggesting that her work was the outcome of an imaginary romance. He even includes a chapter entitled The Museum's Lover. Throughout Maude of McGill, his book, Waugh refers to Abbott by her first name and even by her familiar nickname, Maude, while Osler is always Osler. Quote, the intimacy between Osler and Maude produced a synergism that was the source of much of Maude's professional productivity, he says. Like other women who met him, he continues, Maude fell in love with Osler. She remained his acolyte for the rest of her days. Such presumptuous and leading references can be found beyond the Abbott biographies. Michael Bliss writes rather awkwardly and sort of borderline suggestively about Abbott in his 1999, quote, definitive life of Osler. He says, as curator of McGill's Medical Museum, she became almost literally the keeper of Osler's body parts. Bliss's only substantive reference to their relationship is that Abbott, quote, worshipped Osler. Needless to say, there is no record of Abbott having an affair or any romantic feelings towards Osler. The memories of others who knew Abbott, particularly women, have never been assessed. For example, Scottish-born physician and public health educator Lydia Leela Manley, shown here, met Abbott in 1924 through physician-surgeon Louise Martindale, who knew Abbott from Vienna. She moved to Canada and married physician John Stuart Henry and then stopped practicing medicine. She worked with Abbott on museum specimens and on some of the cases presented in the Atlas. Interestingly, in a letter to historian Margaret Gillette, and another thing Mary Earle pointed out to me, in 1977, Manley jumps right to the problem of the biography. She says, I thought McDermott's biography of her a very poor effort. And I must say, I agree. Here we see the Osler House in Baltimore. The so-called facts regarding the first meeting of Abbott and Osler come from Abbott's autobiographical notes, like so much of her legacy. And I quote them. In January of 1899, on the way to Washington, I stayed over at Baltimore, and there for the first time I met Dr. Osler and had the privilege of making rounds with him and a group of his students and physicians. Not only this, but he invited me to dinner at his house, and afterwards I was present at one of his famous student evenings at which 9 men and 2 young women, interestingly, she notes the presence of women, his case reporters at the hospital, sat around a large dining table and I beside him at one end. After showing us all some rare first editions from the early masters of medicine, and then discussing with them the problems and points of interest in their cases for the week, he turned suddenly upon me as I sat there with my heart beating at the wonderful new world that had opened so unexpectedly before me.
Yeah.
Here we see Abbott's autobiographical notes as they appeared in the recent exhibition at the Osler Library. She continues, and so he quietly dropped the seed that dominated all my future work for many years. Returning to Montreal from this rather strenuous and wholly stimulating trip, and to personal problems of various kinds, I had a sort of nervous breakdown from worry and overtiredness, and I was off work for 6 months. And after that, I gave myself up entirely to work upon the museum collection. This long excerpt from Abbott's autobiographical notes has served as a template for all subsequent publications of her life story. Note that Abbott's account of the meeting makes clear that her so-called nervous breakdown resulted from anxiety, fatigue, and personal problems, not from the excitement of meeting Osler. This slide shows an InDesign mock-up by one of the architecture students of the exhibit table in the recent exhibit. It was called Reading Abbott, that focused on Abbott and Osler. Unfortunately, though, biographers have painted a portrait of Abbott as a somewhat zany, adoring fan of William Osler. What was the relationship of Abbott and Osler? Were they friends, colleagues, mentor and mentee? My chapter 8 in the book, called The Doctor's House, explores the relationship of Abbott and Osler through the letters. And remember, I'm an architectural historian, so through the design of the house. 13 Norham Gardens in Oxford was Abbott's locale during a 3-week period in 1911, immediately following Osler's famous trip to Egypt, which we heard about in Paris's talk, while she recuperated from phlebitis and tonsillitis. I argue in the chapter that the letters show Abbott and Osler as friends and colleagues, with each showing deep respect for the other's medical expertise. The house reveals Abbott's membership in a global network of medical people who visited the Open Arms, the home of the Osler family, and a team of servants. And I finish the chapter and this talk with some social context. The agency of secondary characters in the relationship is very important, namely W.W. Francis, Grace Osler, and Charles Kemmick. So here we go. What do the 100 or so letters from Osler to Abbott tell us? Well, the letters show very clearly that Osler held Abbott in high regard. While he sometimes advised her on matters, he constantly asked her for advice and expressed admiration for her work. In one of his final letters to her from 1919, of course the year he dies, he exclaims, "Just think what you have done for the school." Note he calls her Dr. Abbott and sends love from the two of them. Billy, or W.W. Francis, mentioned here in the letter, is key to the story. Many biographers have pointed to a letter, this one on the screen now, that Osler wrote to Abbott on the 23rd of January 1908 as a particular significant source in her life story. I contend that one of the reasons that they have so assessed it is because the letter is stored distinctly from others in the McGill library system. After Abbott's death in 1940, Osler's nephew, librarian W.W. Francis, framed the letter in this special red leather binder, embossed as the Osler letter, with Maude Abbott on the cover, as you can see in gold letters. And W.W. Francis, he's been mentioned in many of the papers, is the son of Osler's cousin, Marion Francis, and we'll say a little bit more about that in a few minutes. On the note inside, Francis quotes a letter he had received from Osler on the 18th of July in 1908. I hear great praise from some of the London men on Dr. Abbott's article on congenital heart in volume 4 of the system. It quite dominates the volume. There is no commentary included from Abbott. Francis continues, "This letter was one of Maude Abbott's proudest possessions." Remember, he's saying this after she's died. "When it started to wear out, I had it bound for her on the condition that she left it to the Osler Library, which she meant to do in any case. It refers to her congenital cardiac disease in Osler's system. She was deeply touched last year when we discovered that he had inserted a fine but forgotten early photo of her in his copy opposite the beginning of her monograph. The name beneath the photo is in Osler's hand. This is one of many occasions whereby W.W. Francis expresses Abbott's feelings. Admittedly, Abbott does quote the letter in its entirety in her autobiographical sketch, calling it beautiful. The story of her being touched by it, however, only appears here after her death. In my opinion, Francis fetishized and mythologized it. I think early biographers interpreted his special status in the archives, the leather cover, and a special location as evidence of Abbott's special regard for Osler. They took it, in fact, as if the letter had been put aside by Abbott in this way. Here are the actual contents of the letter. I have just finished reading the Proof of Your System article. I expected you to write a good article, but I did not expect a work of such extraordinary merit. It is by far and away the best thing ever written on the subject in English, possibly in any language. For years, it will set the standard in it, and it is articles of this sort, and there are not many of them, that make a system of medicine. Many, many thanks. As I mentioned in the introduction, when I was talking about the book as a whole, the photo Francis mentions is still in Osler's copy of the book. Its long-standing presence has left a mark, a palimpsest, on the first page of Abbott's contribution. I hope this will be on the cover of the book.
Yes.
So in spring 1911, following Osler's trip to Egypt, thank you, Paris, with his brother Edmund, Abbott unexpectedly spent 3 weeks in Oxford with the Oslers as she recovered from phlebitis and tonsillitis. Osler had just sent Abbott this postcard of the columns and entrance of the Temple of Luxor. I'm having a wonderful trip in Egypt, he says, such a country of marvels. What an angel you were to Dr. Francis. He has written so much of your kindness. It is nice to hear that he is doing so well. W.O. Although the postmark on the postcard is somewhat blurred, it may have been sent on the 28th of February, and Osler's reference to Francis being unwell was likely in regards to his tuberculosis, which Francis contracted in 1911. The exact dates of Abbott's time, chez Osler, are unclear. Abbott says spring in her handwritten notes, then at some point she crosses out the word spring to write March. The published version of her autobiographical notes, which were done by McDermott, says that she went to Europe in March and developed the conditions just after landing. She says, I was laid up in London and he and Lady Osler took me with them to Oxford. But since Osler only arrived back in England from Egypt on the 1st of April, doesn't seem quite right. There is no record of Abbott's stay at the house in Osler's papers. So here is the house again. Given the dearth of textual evidence, the Osler house in Oxford, 13 Norham Gardens, the Open Arms, is a helpful way to understand the relationship. I assert that the house acted as a kind of bridge or enabler of the Abbott-Osler relationship. The house had a remarkable power over others too, as many of you already know. It was part of Osler's aura. As renovated by the Oslers, the architecture of the house framed Lady Osler in particular and expressed an atmosphere of conviviality and welcome to thousands of visitors. In the book chapter, I focus on two spaces in the house, the drawing room as a framing device of Lady Osler and reception room for the guests, and the terrace showing here as a place to pause, reflect, and exchange experiences. My big idea in the chapter is that for Osler, the house architecture created an atmosphere, an effect, a condition, a climate, a space to which Abbott and others were subject. The captions on this photo, as I hope you can see below in the white frame in ink, are carefully placed so as to recall which rooms were where. And these were written by Australian Dr. Alan Warren Linford Rowe in 1927. The renovations undertaken by architect Nathaniel Harrison marked a new era in the life of the house, including the Osler's claim on the domestic space. Here you see the house as the Oslers purchased it on the left, and on the right, how they transformed it. The nature of the renovations both feminized and Americanized the house. Even before the Oslers moved in, it was considered distinguished by architectural experts. The house was published at least twice in notable volumes, including 2 editions of William Wilkinson's English Country Houses and in Viollet-le-Duc's Habitation Moderne of 1875. We had both books in the exhibit. The Osler family, 55-year-old William, 50-year-old Grace, and 9-year-old Bouvier, arrived in Oxford in 1905, as you all know so well, for William Osler to become Regius Professor. Now, comparing the plans from the original architect William Wilkinson and the Harrison eras highlights the changes made by the Oslers. The most substantive constituting on the west side of the house, constituting a new drawing room with its own entrance to the garden and a new entry sequence for the whole house. You see a straight entry here and a diagonal entry here. The servants' hall is enlarged. The form and entrance to the back terrace is changed. Wilkinson's drawing room extended towards the garden and became Osler's library. Wilkinson's library is named the Secretary in the newer plan. And when visiting the house today, however, and in some historical accounts, this room is also called the consulting room. So Harrison's entry sequence to the house, too, is much more sophisticated than the original arrangement. It was very important to Osler to have the entry sequence renovated. The new exterior stair is angle and has curved concave sides. The stairs almost appear to reach out to visitors, escorting them in via the architectural forms. And the new arrangement, of course, is also much more layered. It has more filters than the original house, which is an American peculiarity. The main entrance to the house from the street leads to a squarish vestibule. These are my own photos, with a corner removed for the door, and a second entry space, which includes access to a long and narrow WC. On the south side, Harrison widened the back terrace, which became so important to visitors, and the staircase here is also curved and wider at the bottom. The eastern edge of the terrace next to the conservatory is also curved. The stairs, and by implication the house, thus became a stage or a photo backdrop for the nearly touristic atmosphere of the renovated house. A significant space of hospitality was the terrace, which figures in many, many reminiscences by doctors and in photographs. So to use today's measure, it was utterly Instagrammable. The terrace and the interiors were spaces of hospitality, but also spaces of healing for recuperating guests like Abbott. Both Oslers commented on the impactful experience of the renovations in letters to several individuals, suggesting the deliberateness of the architecture. They considered the renovations to the house necessary in order to suit their planned lifestyle. So, at this time, and particularly in avant-garde American architecture, the hipped roof was a symbol of protection and family togetherness. So here's the new Osler addition to the house with this majestic hipped roof. But far more important with regards to the shape of Harrison's roof is that the new addition is highly legible. It screams out that, at least to architectural historians, that it wasn't designed at the same time as the house. It speaks a different architectural language, which is much more romantic. The Oslers thus modernized the house, making it their own. And the couple's architectural decisions were particularly American, communicating how different they were from other Oxford people. Here's the drawing room where guests were greeted by Lady Osler. The nickname "the Open Arms" was an understatement for the scale of hospitality. According to Arnold Muirhead, who of course wrote a book on Lady Osler, the family home became an Oxford institution. It peaked during World War I, when it is reported that 6,000 people visited 13 Norham Gardens. Now, sadly, no register of guests at the Open Arms seems to have survived, though these large numbers of guests are often repeated. The 6,000 appears in many memoirs, perhaps riffing off each other. More difficult to qualify is the atmosphere of hospitality that was somehow felt at Norham Gardens. Visitors describe it in atmospheric terms. Adele Le Bourgeois-Chapin says it became a, quote, background for experiences. G.W. Norris says, of the hospitality meted out at Norham Gardens, it is difficult to speak. One did not have to be told, one was welcome, one somehow felt it. Mecca is a frequent analogy used by medical visitors, suggesting not a religious affiliation, but rather the magnetic pull of the place. Evidence that the extraordinary hospitality of the Open Arms was linked to Grace Osler is that it continued after William Osler's death. Relations and old friends still begged and delighted in her hospitality. Young men still brought their letters of introduction, and the local calls upon her for practical help and sympathy were as numerous as ever, according to Muirhead. The so-called latchkeyers, students who could come and go as they pleased, continued to have access to the house after his death and the tennis court. And all that ended in 1928 when Lady Osler died. But most importantly for my subject, the house served something of a convalescent hospital, offering a particular brand of Oslerian care. No details of Abbott's recovery, Shea Osler, have survived. We know about it mostly from her own reminiscences and from Osler's mentions after her stay. For example, the 5th of May, 1911, he wrote to Thomas McRae, Miss Abbott is all right again, she had a nasty phlebitis. And nearly 4 months later, he wrote to Abbott herself, expressing concern and care. I do hope your wretched phlebitis has vanished this time. The last we heard of you was not satisfactory in the Royal Victoria Hospital with another attack. I'm afraid you did too much after your return. Send a postcard to say how you are. In the Bulletin of the International Association of Medical Museums, Abbott says that in May 1911, she visited hospitals in Paris, Holland, Belgium, and England, suggesting she was feeling okay by May. Remember that in the summer of 1911 was a really busy time for the Oslers, marked by his knighting at the coronation of George V on the 22nd of June. So we know something of the recovery regime at 13 North Gardens from the reminiscences of another famous visitor who would also eventually settle and work in Montreal, a stone's throw from Abbott's Medical Museum, Wilder Penfield. This is for Dr. Del Maestro. Penfield's leg was broken when the SS Sussex, a passenger ferry providing crossing of the English Channel, was torpedoed in 1916. His memoir gives a sharp idea of the rhythm of the house as a convalescent hospital. He says, Revere and W.O. would come into his room, then depart for the library. Later, W.P., that's him, would sit on the terrace, which was outside the library. These spaces gave out onto the garden full of trees and birds. W.O. would sometimes drop a book at W.P.'s table. One of my favorite anecdotes, repeated by so many visitors, is that Osler ran up 2 stairs at a time. And since I saw that, I've been trying to figure out exactly what that says about him, but I bet you have some great ideas. And there are the stairs on the right today, and the stairs when the stairs that Osler ran up 2 at a time in his day. So as you can perhaps now appreciate, one of the only ways to find out about Abbott is through the archives of her male colleagues. That's a well-known challenge in women's history. And most interestingly, perhaps, is the idea that W.W. Francis was an agent or gatekeeper, that he shaped how the Osler-Abbott relationship was understood by previous researchers. On the screen now is a delightful drawing of Francis by the artist Arthur Lismer, a member of the famous Group of 7 in Canada who actually taught in my own department, the School of Architecture, in the 1940s. Wilder Penfield said that WWF served the world as custodian, as Osler's custodian, served the world as custodian of Osler's character and memory. Physician E.P. Scarlett said he is the extension in time of William Osler. And Osler himself appreciated Frances's meticulousness, and as we have seen, made a point of thanking Abbott for her kindness towards him. Abbott and Frances remained friends for the rest of her life. They often lunched together and worked on many projects. When she died, however, he wrote about her in a patronizing way. And as we have seen, he separated certain artifacts from others in the library to enhance their importance. Despite his obvious respect and affection for Abbott, there are moments in the W.W. Frances archive where he mocks her in ways that would be unacceptable today, particularly with regard to her body. In a letter to ophthalmologists and comparative zoologists, it's hard to know how to characterize Casey Wood, the 3rd of January 1939, Frances wrote, "I had the occasion to tell her a week ago that the only catty thing about her was her 9 lives. A few days later, she got into another traffic accident. She was caught between 2 trams and somehow survived with only a few ribs broken. She must be made of rubber, not blubber." Then, referring directly to an incident that saw Abbott hospitalized, where Penfield actually operated on her, Frances added, "In recent years, a Montreal taxi has fractured her skull and a New York lorry broke several of her ribs. She appears to be quite unkillable." So there is also no shortage of sexism in the Frances archive. In a letter of 28th of January 1937, Frances tells Abbott not to speak at the Osler banquet unless called upon. Here is how he put it. "Apart from the introduction of the speaker and the main address, there are usually no speeches at the Osler dinner, and I would leave it for the undergraduates to call on you if they are so inclined. It might be as well for little girls to be seen and not heard, unless invited to get up and speak their piece." In her precious diaries, which are the primary source for my book, Abbott regularly notes when she's seen WWF, as she calls him. Some days in the diary simply say WWF with no other words, suggesting she spent the whole day with him. Quite a few references to Frances in the years 1929 to 35 suggested they passed the Osler bibliography back and forth. Despite the fact that Frances was Abbott's regular eating companion, he constantly chided her for her weight. And Clyde, I would not be surprised at all, wherever you are, that she didn't try some of those diets, because she's constantly recording her weight in her diaries. Took me a while to decode those. So Frances sent this poem to a former dean and historian of medicine in 1956, claiming it had already circulated. "There was a young lady named Maude who was a most terrible fraud. She was never able to eat at the table, but out in the pantry, oh Lord." So when Osler died in 1919, Abbott began to prepare the special issue of the Bulletin of the International Association of Medical Museums dedicated to his memory, shown here in a special bound edition by her good friend Emanuel Libman, whose birthday party I showed you earlier. It was the result of 6 years' work and a tribute of her devotion to studying his legacy. The volume is massive, 634 pages long, with 12 editorials, 12 articles, 59 biographical contributions divided by time periods, 8 addenda, and 6 memoria. The highly significant bibliographical section is in 3 parts. Abbott edited them all, but the key pieces she orchestrated are the foreword to the 2nd edition, a contribution to the biographical section on the pathological collections, and the classified annotated bibliography from foundational work by Minnie W. Bloggs. Abbott raised the money for the Osler volume, including significant funds from Libman. This publication in general established her expertise on Osler's work and legacy. Interestingly, Lady Osler was not so pleased with the plans to publish the issue as a book, and there was some indication in letters from her that Harvey Cushing was somewhat annoyed by the project. Grace Osler said regarding Maude Abbott, "I wonder why that woman has no proper sense." Here is a very special copy of the memorial issue, again with some heavy curatorial work by W.W. Frances. Of course, I wish I had accounts of their time together. I have 2 instances that come close. The first is a series of 4 photos taken by Maude Abbott when she was in Oxford. Here is one, and they're all variations on this group. And again, thanks to Mary Girl for finding on the back of the photo that it says by Maude Abbott, ? The second is a testament to the power of art, which I'll confess is almost as powerful as architecture, which is a story about Abbott sitting for an hour in front of this 1908 portrait of Osler that you all know so well by Seymour Thomas on her post-retirement trip to California in 1936. And she says, although a little stern in expression, it is unquestionably a striking likeness. The easy pose of the figure with its expression of latent strength and the supple, exquisitely drawn hands being entirely characteristic, while the eyes, piercing in their vitality, held one, as in life, by the quiet fire of their expression. The hour which I spent before it in that spacious studio held indeed for me a great experience. So profound was the impression it conveyed of the presence of the original, and so clearly did one feel again the impelling stimulus of his remarkable personality. The sense from this text really is that the hour with the painting almost stood in for Abbott as a personal meeting with Osler. She also notes this encounter with the painting in her diary from 1936, and this is her characteristic diary style. Wednesday, December 2nd, in PM, Dr. Bell sent me in his car to Seymour Thomas's house, where I saw the great picture of Dr. Osler, and Dr. B gave me pictures of W.O. and 5 lantern slides. By the way, Abbott, here's what her diaries look like, so I hope you'll have some sympathy with me that transcribing the diaries has been a decade-long process. So, by the way, she spent the next day after being with the painting in Pasadena. She had an amazing trip to California, roughly from October 25th to December 20th, which was by train. And now, of course, I'm inspired to do a whole separate chapter on California as a space. So here's what she said about it. Thursday, 1936. My cold is better, my big day. Met Mrs. Matthews, clinic at Children's Hospital, 7 good cases. Then there's a line crossed out. Women's Canadian Club luncheon at Women's Athletic Club. Talked on at A. I don't know what that means. Great fun. Banquet at the Pasadena Club in the evening and Osler talk at Smith Memorial. Dr. Doc, we heard about in the library, and Dr. Sherry in chair. They gave me $100, exclamation mark. Returning to Oxford and our main subject, and trying to pull all this together, I'll underline again that Abbott was but one of thousands of medical students and professionals who were welcomed at 13 Norham Gardens. While I'm generally not in favor of random comparisons, a fair and suitable comparison might be drawn between Charles N.B. Camac, whose letters we miraculously saw yesterday at the Huntington, I couldn't have planned it better, and a physician who worked at both the University of Pennsylvania and Johns Hopkins before a successful career in New York. Now, astonishingly, Camac has the same birth and death years as Maude Abbott. He first met Abbott in 1895, just a few years before Abbott's meeting with Osler in Baltimore. I was astounded to see that he also uses a seed analogy to describe his relationship with the famous physician, which I think has also been misinterpreted in a kind of sexualized way by previous Abbott biographers. Furthermore, Camac stayed in Oxford in 1905, was close to Lady Osler, and eventually wrote this book about William Osler. My point here is that Osler's influence on Abbott was not unique. She was one of many doctors of her generation whom he influenced in exactly this way. So in conclusion, encountering Maude Abbott through 10 Spaces, I think, offers a different understanding of her extraordinary work in life. In some ways, it makes her more ordinary. Museums, administrative offices, portraits, events, celebrations, international travel, curated exhibits, sojourns for recovery, novels and poems, and even buildings that purposefully excluded her led readers on a different course than the signposts of the traditional Abbott narrative. Embracing this spatial evidence for me has meant revisiting Abbott's life in relatively positive terms, rather than focusing on the barriers and constraints that she faced as emphasized by previous biographers. Even a highly educated, privileged, mobile, white, middle-class woman such as Abbott did not record everything that she did or felt. Spatial and visual evidence sometimes allows us to see our subjects unencumbered by a mad search for textual proof. Just because she didn't write it down, for example, doesn't mean it didn't happen, which is a position not taken by previous biographers who relied so heavily on Abbott's own notes from 1928 and also consulted very few archives outside of Montreal. Another rather quirky aspect of my own spatial research, and the reason why it fits so well in the weird topics session this morning, is that I have depended a lot on the archives of others, especially men, to find Abbott's voice. Even though her archives are voluminous, they are tiny in relation to her contemporaries, William Osler, Harvey Cushing, and even Paul Dudley White, with whom she regularly traveled. My 10 spaces, including the open arms, show the sheer messiness of Abbott's life and work. And so what others have interpreted as emotional upheaval, I read as depression. What she knew, what she thought, who cared about her work, and why are spaces worth exploring. Thank you very much.
That helps.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.